You can't let your failures define you. You have to let your failures teach you. These amazing words were said by Honorable and former President Barack Obama, and I 100% agree with every word being said. Yes, failures are kind of messy. They make us feel that this is the end of the line, pal. Let's give up on this. There's nothing beyond this. But the truth is, everything is beyond that end of the line. Another beginning, another chance to succeed, another lesson being learned. It is completely your call of how you want to take failure as. Completely your choice of looking at failure with the positive aspect or the negative one. Completely your decision to get up and start again or sit and crib about it. Hello and welcome with all the love and gratitude. I'm your show host Mithali Ohri here again with another very special and an important episode that will change your perspective of the way you look at failure. Our amazing guest Andrew Thorp King will educate you on how failure holds a lot of value on the road to success and discuss his book Failure Rules. Andrew Thorp King is an executive fintech banker, spy novelist, speaker, punk rocker, podcaster, ex-bodybuilder, cigar lover, and serial entrepreneur. He founded 2 independent record labels, Thorp Records and Sailor's Grave Records, and has invested in many spaces including online lending, fitness, lead generation, and independent music. Just like his name, he turned out to be a king of his life and fate. So with all that being said, let us welcome Andrew. Andrew, welcome to Self Talk Show. I would first like to applaud you for your commendable work and also want to thank you for choosing this show as a medium to discuss your book. Secondly, very honored to have you as my podcast guest. So let me begin by asking you, what's your story of transformation? How did you overcome all the failures and became the Andrew Thorp King? What was your moment of impact that woke you?
So my story of transformation really started, I think, throughout my 20s and 30s as I was kind of stumbling through my life as an adult in the working world, and both by nature and necessity, I was kind of drawn towards entrepreneurial pursuits. I had a young family, one income, and was not finding jobs that really could pay me enough to really provide enough for my family. So that was one element. The other element was I was really on this journey and on this quest to find a way to marry money and meaning. I knew that money was important from a utilitarian standpoint, and even from a flourishing standpoint. I also knew that meaning was important to really sustain any sort of fulfillment or happiness over time. So it was this constant kind of toggle between money and meaning, and how do I marry the two? And throughout my 20s and 30s, I did many things to try to reach that balance between money and meaning, and many of them resulted in lots of failures. And it was kind of the lessons I learned throughout my 20s and 30s that really informed the book as I was on the precipice of my 40s and walking through twin failure moments. One was a business divorce that I had just gone through in an online lending company that I was partner in. I had left the company because of some disagreements with the partner. I kind of forfeited my position as COO, sold my shares, and really was at a point where I had my core income had gone away. I had other income, and I had to reorganize my life to move forward and think about my next pursuit. And at the same time, I was on the precipice of a marital divorce with my first wife. So I was walking on the beach and thinking about all the different entrepreneurial kind of experimentation and pursuits that I'd gone after, all which kind of burned inside me, and I chased after until either failure, partial success, full success, or any variation in between, because that's my nature, to chase what burns inside me, to destroy future regret, so that I'm never on my deathbed thinking, what should I have done, or what if I actually chase this? That's been one of my greatest satisfactions. And so I'm thinking through this, and I had done many kind of ventures, everything from owning and starting record labels, to working in the music industry, to starting a financial planning practice, to being a part owner in online lending companies, owning a gym, to writing a spy novel. I've done many things. And as I reflected on this beach walk, of course I'm listening to punk rock music because I'm an old punk rocker. So the songs Hard Times by the Cro-Mags, the singer for Cro-Mags, John Joseph, who's a triathlete, author of the PMA Effect. He wrote the foreword to Failure Rules. He's also been a guest on Joe Rogan many times. And also I was listening to the song Ace of Spades by Motorhead, and kind of the lyrics to those songs, along with the quote by Winston Churchill that success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, really kind of drove me to think about what had been kind of the enduring endorphin that had gotten me through various failures. And it was essentially, it was my enthusiasm. And I thought about how I had gone through a bankruptcy, how I had abandoned a home at one time, how I had fallen on public assistance, all these kind of really terrible things that happened through the nooks and crannies of going from one pursuit to another that really, challenged me. And I wanted to kind of write a book about the lessons I had learned from that, as well as, what were the sustaining inspirational inputs, be it writers, be it spirituality, sacred text, be it music, be it podcasts, these kind of key virtual mentors that kind of inform my strength during these times. And so that's when I got the idea for Failure Rules with an exclamation mark, the 5 rules of failure for entrepreneurs, creatives, and authentics. And I wrote some loose notes that day, that was end of 2013, and began writing the book in 2014. And the first draft was, as Hemingway would say, was crap, although he would use a different word. And but from draft to draft over the years, it really got refined and started to reveal its structure. Ended up being, where all these lessons kind of anchored each chapter to a quote. And then these lessons rolled up very naturally in categories into these 5 rules of failure that I've identified. So that was really kind of the origin story of the transformation, and has kind of informed, I think, the way to premeditatively think of and handle failures has informed, how I approach my work-life tapestry now, and continually work to marry money and meaning. And throughout my 40s, I've had much more, a better stretch of prosperity, and have continued to maintain a portfolio of pursuits, work as a fintech banker, still run record labels in the background, again, wrote the spy novel, have had other ventures, and now I'm really kind of fully focused on tying in all those experiences under the umbrella of the 5 rules of failure within the book Failure Rules.
Oh my goodness, Andrew, I'm feeling so inspired right now. I'm sure our audience are too. That's one of the brilliant transformation stories I've ever heard. I can say you are the jack of all trades and master of all as well. Would you like to shed some light over your work? What role did music play during your difficult phase?
So yeah, again, in terms of shedding light on my work, I think I just kind of went through some of the things that I have done in the past and what I'm engrossed in now. Again, I'm an executive fintech banker, which means I work for an online tech company that services the financial technology space. So we work with companies that are similar to a lot of these companies that have very cool apps that help you move money quickly or across borders or in interesting ways. The Venmos, the Chimes of the world, those type of companies. And I really enjoy that work. I work kind of more like an innovation lab type thing, where I work on projects that are new initiatives, new products and services, help make the case to the enterprise, and then mobilize them through working with the various teams within the bank to get them into production. And so that's one really large piece of my work life. And then again, I still maintain record labels in the background, Thorp Records and Sailor's Grave Records. One is a hardcore metal label that has done records for bands like Madball, Blood for Blood, Sheer Terror, Slapshot, old school New York hardcore punk bands. The other one is Sailor's Grave Records. It's done records for different subgenres like psychobilly, which mixes like rockabilly with punk rock, and I've done bands like Coughing Cats and The Creep Show. Also, oi music, which is kind of a British derivative of more like pub rock with lots of chants, soccer hooligan type music. Bands like The Business or Booze and Glory, and even Celtic punk bands like Flatfoot 56 that integrate bagpipes into what they do. So I do that, and then I love writing, right? And I love thinking, and I love that world. And so, really have kind of been a student over the years, on top of loving spy novels and writing my own spy novel, which is Blaze, Operation Persian Trinity. Also, really kind of fell into kind of as in my own studies and absorption, and helping me navigate work life and balancing it with personal life and spiritual and emotional life. And I've really fallen into, I guess some would call it the self-help space. I would say more business psychology, right? And so reading, various books in that space really led me to write Failure Rules. 2 books that were wildly influential and kind of inspired me to write this were James Altucher's Choose Yourself, I love James's raw vulnerability and his creative way of thinking about hacks to, you really use the power of disintermediation and online access to create a different kind of life in an entrepreneurial fashion. And also Srinivas Rao's book, The Art of Being Unmistakable. It's also a great book that really kind of details his life as a corporate misfit and how he kind of went off-road and tied in his love for surfing to kind of create his own pursuits in writing and in podcasting. And so that was another book that really kind of inspired me. And to your question about music and what role that plays for me during difficult phases, I reference and write a lot about hardcore punk bands and quotes from songs that have really inspired me and literally buoyed me through hard times. So there's a soundtrack companion to the book that's on Spotify and Apple Music, the Failure Rules soundtrack, and they're literally the songs that either inspired some of the writings or I listened to while I was writing it. And so it's again a lot of hardcore punk bands like Rancid, bands like Madball, bands like Billy Bio, Down to Nothing, and then even some outliers, right? So it's my authentic soundtrack, even some mainstream stuff, some non-punk hardcore stuff, everything from Eminem to Bob Seger to Machine Gun Kelly and Johnny Cash, right? Music's always been that soundtrack for me. It's always given me that strength, just the magic of the lyricism and how that interacts with the melodies and the beats or the guitars to really, help stir that energy, whether it's before I'm going on a podcast or before I'm sitting down for a writing session or while I'm in a writing session or before I'm getting ready to speak to hundreds of executives to present a project proposal. Music is one of the most powerful fuels of my life and my work life.
That's amazing. Music is the one to which every individual connects to, and it energizes us, really takes us to a different world filled with different perspectives. Let us discuss your book, Failure Rules. What factors influence your decision to include the 5 failures in this book, and what are these 5 rules of failure for entrepreneurs, creative and authentics?
So in terms of what influenced my decision to include the 5 failure rules in the book and kind of structure it that way, it really was looking at the manuscript in later drafts and saying, how can I make this more accessible to the reader and break it down into chunks? And so I had these lessons, that are attached to each chapter that were kind of informed by an anchor quote by either an influencer or a virtual mentor, whether it be Aristotle or Gene Simmons from Kiss. So a wide variety of anchor quotes at the top of each chapter. And again, I found that I was able to kind of chunk themes of certain chapters into categories, and those categories became rules. So the 5 rules of failure are: failure rule number 1 is failure purifies. It's the idea that if you are able to step out of your failure events and be an objective observer of them as opposed to a emotional participant in them, that you can see the failure as something that might be transformative for you and actually might be a friend of yours, even if it was something you didn't want and wished you avoided. There's usually something in there that can help transform you. Oftentimes in failures, you can find old thinking that needed to die, old ways of being that needed to transform into new ways of being, and you can let that failure transform you as you stretch yourself into a better next version of yourself, and more succinctly join yourself with your calling journey. It's the idea that the phoenix must burn to emerge, and you have to go through those flames to do that. It also kind of dovetails with the idea that author Nassim Taleb, who also published through Lioncrest Publishing, my publisher, his book Anti-Fragile, he talks about, there's certain people in this world that are oriented as such where they not only are resilient when they fall or when they fail or when harm hits them, but they actually gain from harm. They have an exponential growth out of it, like a hydra. And so it's also dovetails with that idea. Failure rule number 2 is nothing is safe. And it's the idea that your dreams aren't safe, the world isn't safe, so stop pretending so. Don't always put safety first. Measure safety prudently against other competing values and see where it ought, rightly fall in the rank of your evaluation of any sort of pursuit or thing you're going after. And so, there's lots of examples of kind of how I frame that idea in the book. One of them is Mike Rowe, his show Dirty Jobs. He had an episode called Safety Third, which was really just his way of saying, don't always place safety first. Doesn't mean you have to arbitrarily place it third, but he's saying that the same idea, that safety ought to be evaluated against other competing values, some of which may often be higher than safety. And that if your world is all about safety, it's probably too small. You're probably not doing anything difficult, and you're probably not really actualizing, your talent stack in a way where you're giving the world the highest use of yourself and really reaching the fulfillment you need to reach. Failure rule number 3: money is spiritual. So that is the idea that money is really an agnostic tool. If you avoid the failure edge territories of envy and greed, which I believe are malevolent twin siblings and are really just inverse kind of spirits, if you avoid those edges, that money itself can be a tool of blessing. It's essentially a thank you note, where money itself in a transaction is, when used rightly, is you placing value on something which reflects your measured thankfulness. And money can be something that really buoys people out of poverty, that helps to bless others, and can really fuel innovation and advancement in humankind and in individuals. So that's failure rule number 3. Failure rule number 4 is build your thing 1 and thing 2 dependency. Thing 1 and thing 2 is not a Cat in the Hat reference. It's more, I think, of like a disheveled Tony Soprano, waking up with his first cigar of the day in his white bathrobe and saying, hey, you got a thing 1 enabler over here, the thing 2 North Star pursuit over there. And so it's the idea that you have an enabler pursuit that really gives you the scaffolding and structure to give you at least a little more stability as you chase an aspirational North Star pursuit that might have more risk. And then you can then go after that with a little bit of a platform of stability. And it's about the idea that you can't just go after your dreams all the time head first without some sort of supporting structure around it. And sometimes you're going to be very creative about that. I go through an example in the book of 2 brothers who came to the United States from Lebanon, and for them, their pursuit of happiness was to be in business for themselves. They wanted to build a retail brick and mortar empire or mini empire in the city they lived in. So they didn't have the seed money. And so they didn't just work regular 9-to-5 jobs, have expenses, and put money aside. They creatively found a job working for Disney on Ice, traveling, working in the vending trucks, selling merch. Disney on Ice covered their lodging, covered all their food, so they had no expenses. They were married to the road, had no home for 2 years. That gave them an accelerated way to save up their seed money and come back and build that empire. And so they ended up owning gas stations and gyms and cigar lounges, other retail stores, and they actually lived their dream. So it's the idea that they use that thing 1 enabler of Disney on Ice to help them build towards their thing 2 North Star dream. Failure rule number 5: you are not your failures. This is a tough one for a lot of people, but I think it's the most powerful. It's the idea that just because you go through a failure event, you do not need to, you can decouple that from your identity. You are not your failures, right? It feels that way in the heat of it. It feels like that's who you are, and that's just part of your character because it's embedded in your story. But again, if you step outside of the event and become an objective observer, you realize that's not who you are. You are not your failure. It's just an event. Find a way to learn from it. Find a way to pull value and help it inform a more wise and a more integrated person as you move forward. Lots of examples in the book around failure rule number 5, including an example about Elgin James, who was once the leader of a violent street gang, also happens to be half-brother of Jocko Willink. Elgin was involved in the hardcore punk scene, particularly the straight edge scene, which was a subgenre of punk that abstained from alcohol and drugs. And he was in a violent faction of it, where they actually would beat up people that did drugs or drank at different punk shows. It turned to be a very negative kind of gang that he was in, and he did some things that really he had to pay for. He ended up being sentenced for some extortion charges, but he was also pursuing another dream in parallel as he walked away from gang life and renounced it. He then chased his North Star pursuit, his Thing 2 dream, to become a screenwriter. Moved to LA with his girlfriend, ended up becoming a mentee to Robert Redford, and on the day of his sentencing, there was kind of this paradox moment where he talks about shedding his past but paying for it. And at the same time, that same day, he also was given a deal by Universal Pictures for his first film. He went on to healthily pay for his past and decouple his identity from that ethical failure, and then also to become a screenwriter for the hit show Mayans FX, which was a spin-off to FX Channel's hit show Sons of Anarchy.
I would highly recommend to all the beautiful listeners to order your copy of Andrew's recently published book, Failure Rules. Find the link in the episode description. In your last chapter, You Are Not Your Failures, one of the subtopic was Rejection is Fuel. Would you like to elaborate the same?
So yes, this question really centers around rejection. So I do have a chapter on in the book called Rejection is Fuel. And it is the idea that just like failure, you need to expect rejection when you're doing difficult things. You need to know that you will kind of have your ego knocked down a little bit as you encounter rejection. But you shouldn't really judge those that are rejecting you. You should kind of objectively analyze why they're rejecting you. Some rejections actually might be prudent, might be informative and constructive, and might be helping you change to become better at what you're going after. And some rejection needs to be rejected, and you need discernment to figure that out. The rejection that needs to be rejected really is kind of a test of your will to continue on in what you're doing and your belief in yourself. The rejection that needs to be accepted is a test of your flexibility and your humility, so that you know when you actually need to take sound advice, even if it comes and is delivered in a way that is abrasive, and inform your ways of change so you become better at what you're doing. And so it's this idea that rejection isn't really bad. It's your reaction to it that matters, and your judgment of it. And so that is one of the chapters in the book. I use a quote from Sylvester Stallone as an anchor quote, where he basically says rejection for him is like a bugle blowing in his ear. And that's the way I live my life, and that's the way that I try to handle rejection when I'm doing it well.
I completely agree with you that our reaction to rejection really matters, and of course, do not judge those who reject you. In fact, analyze. How tough was it for you to make the decision to pursue a profession you enjoy over one that made more sense financially?
So the idea of pursuing something that is more in line with passions or something I love versus something that makes sense financially. Again, it goes back to this idea of marrying money with meaning. I don't think you really ought to sacrifice one for another. So I talk about a portfolio pursuits mentality in the book, using an anchor quote from Gene Simmons from Kiss, where he says it's better to be an octopus than a fish. If one tentacle gets sliced off, you have many more to keep swimming with. And so it's the idea of having a portfolio of pursuits in your work life, in your interest life, in your hobby life, so that on the aggregate between the many things that you might be doing or pursuing, some might carry low meaning but high financial rewards. Some might carry low financial rewards but high meaning, or a mix of the two. But it's the idea that if you build this in a sound way, you can hope to achieve as much of 100% fulfillment in both money and meaning on the aggregate throughout that composite. So it's that idea, as opposed to just having one job, and maybe the job over time becomes deficient meaning, or maybe it's deficient money but high in meaning, and you have that struggle with finances, and that doesn't really work. Either one of those scenarios that are imbalanced don't work. And so the idea here is to have a portfolio of pursuits to build that redundancy and give you a chance that on the composite, on the aggregate, most times you can be as close to 100% as you possibly can in both of those buckets, the money and the meaning.
What is your best piece of advice for folks who are afraid to take the plunge into something they are passionate about?
So again, in terms of advice for people that are thinking about taking the plunge into something they're passionate about, again, I would say, remember failure rule number 2, nothing is safe. Your dreams aren't safe, but you ought to pursue them anyway, because even in the pursuing them, you'll be able to satiate that desire, and you might actually be able to make headway towards your dreams. But while you're doing it, make sure you use failure rule number 4. Build your thing 1 and thing 2 dependency. Try to build as much of a safe structure as possible to enable you to reach your dream with as little risk as possible. You're still going to have some risk, because all difficult pursuits have risk, and you need to embrace that too. But you might as well build a structure to try to mitigate them as well. Remember this portfolio pursuits mentality, that even as you're chasing your dream, have some things in the back burner that you might need to pivot to, or that might be able to fulfill other needs while you're going after this really, really high meaning, aspirational North Star dream. And so it's thinking creatively on how to structure and balance these different things, because again, nothing is safe.
That's a wonderful piece of advice, Andrew. What does it mean to you to be authentic even in the face of failure?
So the word authentic is something really that I use as a noun in the book. I'm probably the first one using it as such. I don't know, but I do define it in the definition of terms. And it's really, I define it as someone who is really in touch with their internal spirit voice and those promptings that might be calling them to this aspirational North Star, pursuit or set of pursuits, which aligns with their calling journey, which is unique to them in terms of how they might find ways to manifest their highest unique usefulness in the world. And so it's from that perspective, right? So the more you're in touch with that spirit voice and aligned with the calling journey, the more authentic you really are. But at the same time, being authentic is a spectrum. As we get introduced to new interest, new settings, new ways of being, our authenticity will expand. It's elastic. And so it's being in touch with that too, that it's an evolving thing. And I think when we're confronted with failures, I think we have a couple responses. The one would be to be introspective and to figure out how we can be authentic in those failures and to own our responses to those failures and find a way to continue to be authentic as we move on, even if it's our expanding what our definition of our own authenticity is. And the other is to potentially cower and to cling to safety and drift away from our authenticity, drift away from difficult things, and drift away from risk because we've been burned by failure. And I think that would be, a tragic response to a failure event.
Incredible. How crucial is it for entrepreneurs to have backup plans when embarking on new ventures?
So yeah, again, in terms of backup plans when embarking on ventures, goes back to the whole thing one and thing two dependency idea, failure rule number 4, and have that scaffolding, have that structure to help you more safely go after your North Star pursuit, your aspirational dream, as well as a portfolio of pursuits mindset that's even larger than just thing one, thing two, having some other things potentially built in there too, to kind of build that composite to help you on the aggregate really fill those needs in you for money and meaning. So I would point back to those concepts.
How should entrepreneurs change their mentality about money and the consequences of making or not making a lot of it? I think one of the chapters, Money is Spiritual, in your book also talks about the same, if I'm not wrong.
So failure rule number 3, money is spiritual. You're asking about that in this question in terms of how entrepreneurs, might think about the consequences of making money or not making money. I think really, the really key thing there is kind of this, it's a cautionary tale, right? I mean, money is spiritual, really saying, avoid envy and greed, avoid those failure edge territories, and you'll probably have a higher likelihood of, genuine transactions in the world, sustainability of your reputation, sustainability of a business, even if not, making tons of money. But at the same time, think about the power of money and its spiritual power as a thank you note, as something that is, measuring your gratitude or measuring gratitude towards you for whatever you're offering. And I think it's just thinking of money in that way as opposed to, the extremes of reviling money or worshiping money. And so that's essentially what that rule really details in all the chapters under that rule in the book.
True. What advice do you offer to entrepreneurs who struggle to find time for themselves?
So yeah, what you're hitting on here with this question in terms of, advice that I would offer to entrepreneurs struggling to find time for themselves, that's really important. I contend that one must really find ways to maintain a surplus of solitude to balance out a surplus of intense activity, in a potentially a VUCA environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, which I talk about in the book. And these times of surplus solitude are really necessary to digest, to reflect, to step away from the trifles of the day-to-day, think about big picture visions, make sure that, if there's any pivots that need to be contemplated, you're thinking through those while maintaining the overarching vision, and just digesting the complexity of life in general, of being an entrepreneur and how that affects and influences and impacts your own mental health and your personal relationships, and your spirituality.
Any message that you would like to leave our listeners with?
So yeah, lastly, I'd say, the abiding message here, really, I would say that, really failure rule number 5, you are not your failures, is probably a good takeaway to emphasize here. If you're walking through your failure right now, just try to find a way to step out of it, find a way to try to be an objective observer of that failure event, to not be as emotional of a participant. That's going to be a part of it, of course, and think of ways that you can use the chaos energy of that failure to shape it into something that will serve you as you move forward into your next step, as opposed to something that's going to destroy you or cripple you or paralyze you. And keep going, KBO, keep buggering on, just like Churchill would say, and find a way to leverage your failures as something that will transform you into a success path that's authentic for you. There's lots of examples in the book of that. You can find the book anywhere books are consumed online. You can find me at andrewthorpking.com, no E on the end of Thorpe. You can connect with me on Instagram through that. You can connect with my YouTube channel, where I have some produced videos which amplify the themes of the book in a different way. Also, my merchandise company, Soul on Fire Supply Company, can be found there. Some awesome designs related to the book. And you can get a free Failure Rules mini course by signing up for my email list on the website. So please go check all that out, andrewthorpking.com, no E on the end of Thorpe. And thank you so much for having me on the Self Talk Show.
That's a wonderful message, Andrew. Thank you for your time. It was lovely having you on the show. You can connect with Andrew through his website. Find the link in the episode description. So with this, we come to an end of this episode. Hope you liked it, and the feedback would definitely do wonders. I would really appreciate it if you can subscribe to Self Talk Show. More episodes and more awareness is coming your way. So stay tuned and keep self-talking. You can reach out to me for questions, queries or suggestions at www.selftalkshow.com or email me at showselftalk@gmail.com or through social media pages on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. Thank you again and see you with another episode.